So right now what we're going to do is a session that I've been wanting to do at a BIA-Kelsey conference for at least the last 4 years. And this is an area we've been covering, but this really formalizes our coverage in that area in a conference session. So we're calling it on-demand local services. You may have already heard it known as things like collaborative consumption or the sharing economy or the on-demand economy. It's gone by many different names, but essentially the broad definition is that it's using mobile or in some cases desktop to basically summon in an on-demand fashion different local services to be fulfilled in an immediate fashion offline. So you have companies like Uber that have really put it on the map, or Airbnb, but it's really starting to transform and be applied to different verticals, as we're going to see when we get to the panel portion of this discussion. And it's really kind of upending the local service economy and changing the unit economics in really interesting ways by putting buyer and seller together in more of a direct fashion. So there are all kinds of different meta trends that are leading up to this and creating a fertile environment for this to grow. So let's start by defining it. I mentioned there are many different terms that have been used: sharing economy, collaborative consumption, et cetera, whatever we're calling it. How do you kind of define this, and what are some of the attributes of this burgeoning area?
So the way that we believe, the way we look at it at Urgently is basically on-demand means I have a need.
Yep.
I want it fulfilled now or relatively soon, and I'm going to search for it either through an app, a dedicated app to it like Urgently or Uber or whatnot, or some other search channel. And what's going to be surfaced to me is available capacity and providers to fulfill that immediate need, dimensionalized against location,
Yep.
availability, and capability. And then a very frictionless way to secure and make those connections. And then complete visibility and transparency into the where, when, how, and who that's doing it.
And that gets into some of the attributes that make this fertile kind of area of growth in having some of the technological trends, some of the cultural trends that have created these kind of marketplaces that have more liquidity and more transparency that kind of enable all this. What are some of those factors? And you also have an interesting way of looking at it, and the way you just kind of phrased it in those last comments was kind of dimensionalizing search. And you have an interesting way of looking at how we're in kind of a different paradigm of this search, kind of area that we've known as one thing for the last decade or so.
Yeah, so again, the way we view it at Urgently is that search, as it's been for the last 10 years, is kind of a flat, two-dimensional experience, whereas search, the way that it's going, as it's being manifested through on-demand apps like Urgently and Uber and Lyft and whatnot, is again surfacing those and exposing those dimensions, right? Where am I? Where are they? Are they available?
Yep.
Are they capable? And can I connect directly, right, with very little friction in between,
Yep.
right? And so what we believe deeply is that how you interact through these apps is actually the future of search, and that Google and Bing and others in the search game are going to have to dimensionalize in order to stay relevant.
So what this has all led up to is really an explosion of different apps. And of course, overall in the tech world, the barriers to entry have lowered in order of kind of development costs and other things like that. So we have the app economy, which is something that has grown so much, kind of colliding with this area of on-demand local services. And what you see is a result of this is just a small slice of it. And this slide is probably about 6 months old, and it probably looks dramatically different today. So what do you feel about the overall ecosystem and how that's developing, verticalizing, et cetera?
Yeah, I would imagine that the number of companies on this is doubled since this slide was created, and I think there's $3.4 billion invested in on-demand in recent months.
Yep.
So again, if you think about a vertical, right, and it was touched on in this morning's panel, every vertical is literally being disrupted.
Yes.
And it's not only on the consumer side, but it's on the servicer or the supply side,
Yep.
right? So not only are traditional suppliers, big companies, better able to expose their inventory through this, but it is empowering, I think, what Will called the 1099 economy.
Yeah.
And we believe that passionately as well. UberX is probably the best example
Exactly.
of that, but expect that revolution to occur across any vertical that you can imagine.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about Urgently now and how you are applying all of those different principles and building upon them in your business.
Yeah, sure. So, what we do is, we're on-demand roadside assistance. The easiest way to describe it to a civilian who's not in the space is to say Uber for roadside. And if you think about a roadside incident that you may have had, the desire for speed, visibility, transparency, where are they, who are they, when are they coming to get me, how much is this actually going to cost, that's what we do, right? Sure. And we do it in a number of different ways. We do it through our own native apps. We do it through HTML5 apps that play well in search. We also do it through APIs that we integrate into a number of different mapping and connected car partners, as well as some others that we'll be announcing soon. So it's a massive business. There's about 100 million roadside incidents a year.
Absolutely.
Dominated, of course, by AAA. That's everybody in everybody's mindset, but also an old economy business model, which millennials cannot relate to, which is an annual subscription for something that you may not need, right?
Yes, that very generational factor in all of this. Millennials don't want to own things, they don't want subscriptions, so there's very kind of on-demand nature of this, not only for all the reasons we mentioned technologically, culturally, but this generational factor means it's only going to grow in terms of the need for something that is more on-demand, more just kind of a la carte, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, so everybody in a roadside incident, timeliness is the number one issue. How fast can I get out of this? Millennials expect now.
That's also
That's what they want now.
They're very empowered in addition to the things I mentioned.
And they turn to their phones for that solution. And it's interesting, we connect with millennials not only using search, right? So they turn to Google on their phone and they search, but we also see millennials turning to the App Store to look for solutions. So again, something that was touched on in this morning's panel, that App Store optimization may be more important than search in certain verticals. We're actually starting to see some of that come through in our data.
We're going to talk to Bing about that tomorrow, and the concept of deep linking and creating more of a interconnected web of what is otherwise a siloed app environment. So yeah, that App Store optimization is absolutely vital. Let's talk about your pricing, because I think that brings up a few interesting points in that, some of the things I alluded to about kind of knocking down the barriers of traditional companies and firms that have a certain amount of overhead and that gets passed on to the customer. By having more of a kind of direct and on-demand model, you're enabling some of these more favorable unit economics.
Yeah, so we do flat rate pricing that's pre-negotiated with the towers. It's flat rate to the consumer, so they see up front before they engage. They know exactly how much it's going to cost them, so there's no funny business on the back end in essentially what is a vulnerable moment for them, right? And because we operate hyper efficiently as a digital platform, we can actually cut most of that fee over to the tower and pay them 2 to 3x over what AAA or the insurance model pays them. Now, what that starts to kick in is they start to prefer taking our work over the work that they get from the insurance companies in AAA, because they're earning more money on that, and we're starting to see service provider behavior change in our favor in, say, our home market of DC, which was where we launched. And so the opportunity actually for us as we scale is to kind of hit this balance where we pay the providers a really good rate, more than they can make elsewhere, continue to lower the cost for the consumer, but still maintain favorable margins for us, right?
Well, and that network you create by having a very stacked supply side, it would seem also lends itself to things such as better speed to any situation, to any, geographically speaking, if you're more concentrated.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we want to incent the towers or the roadside assistance guys to flip themselves on into our marketplace. And at the end of the day, what we want to be able to do is there's a person who needs help here, and there's a servicer around the corner here, and they're both in the marketplace, and they connect. And when it's working as we've envisioned, we're delivering service in 8 minutes. I mean, that is, a beautiful thing to watch.
So that leads into, right before we go to our panel, the question of that kind of supply-demand imbalance and creating that in these two-sided marketplaces, and doing so in what would seem to be kind of geographic challenges, rolling that out. And you've been actually nationwide. You now are nationwide. So what are the challenges in creating the liquidity and the kind of even marketplaces to create those scenarios you just outlined, and doing so not just in one community, but then replicating that across the whole country?
Well, we had a bit of an unfair advantage
Sure.
in that we were able to acquire a network asset that had been the white label roadside assistance provider for AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile since the mid-90s.
Yep.
So we were able to acquire a nationwide network, and so the challenge for us is not necessarily dropping into, say, Boston and figuring out who the best providers are and running a community manager model, but scaling and lighting up that network as we're able to feed them demand, right?
Yeah.
So it makes no sense for us to light all 12,000 providers
Yep.
up and then have crickets as we build up
Right. It's kind of a
the
step
demand
function.
side. So for us, it's this kind of push-pull,
Step
right?
function, yeah.
Exactly. So that's where we are. But partnerships like we just launched with MapQuest about a month ago, and we've got a ton of other partnerships coming down the line, which we'll announce soon. We'll start to drive that engine. So
great.
Yeah.
Well, let's invite the other folks up here. Are you guys close by? So we have 3 other panelists that are going to join this discussion, and likewise have interesting ways that this overall model is applying to different verticals. And we have kind of a few great verticals represented: retail, professional services, and kind of peer-to-peer transactions. So why don't you guys come on up?